It's striking, isn't it? You see bike sharing in places like Japan, and you can't help but notice the hurdles, the way cities are built there. It just doesn't seem to fit quite right.
Yeah, the sidewalks are crowded, and riding on the roads, well, can feel a bit much sometimes.
Exactly. Now contrast that with the sheer explosion of bike sharing we saw in China, and
Mhm.
then, the rather bumpy aftermath.
The contrast is really key. In China, these services, they just spring up practically overnight in cities and tourist spots.
Right, like,
Imagine unlocking a bike with just a quick QR code scan on your phone, paying like a few yuan per hour through Alipay or WeChat Pay, which are dominant there,
mm,
and crucially being able to drop it off at, well, any designated spot. That freedom, not having to return it where you started, that was a real game changer for getting around cities.
absolutely. And like many people, you probably remember the headlines, right? Charting the incredible growth of companies like Updovo and Mobike,
Oh, yeah.
followed by those quite dramatic stories of sidewalks just overflowing with abandoned bikes and eventually their big financial troubles.
Which really brings us to the core question for this deep dive.
Mhm.
Was that whole thing just a classic investment bubble bursting, leaving behind piles of scrap metal?
Yeah.
Or is there maybe a more complex, a more nuanced story here about the actual impact and maybe the future of bike sharing in China? That's what we really want to dig into.
Okay, let's unpack this because while those images, those bike graveyards, were certainly powerful,
Very powerful.
it's easy to overlook just how useful bike sharing actually was when it first popped up. It genuinely tackled that, what they call the last mile problem.
Right, that gap between, say, the subway station and your actual destination. Too short for a taxi, maybe a bit too long or inconvenient to walk.
Exactly.
And of Mofo and Mobike, they were the undisputed giants, locked in this really intense competition for users.
Yeah.
And that very competition, like you said, is what eventually led to that highly visible problem, the discarded bikes that grabbed headlines everywhere.
But here's where it gets really interesting because the story of a complete collapse, it doesn't quite track, does it? I mean, my understanding is bike sharing is still around. People are still using it in Chinese cities today. Is that right?
Precisely, yeah. In the wake of all the drama with of FIO and Mobike, we've actually seen a resurgence. Companies like Hello Bike, for instance.
Yeah, like, okay.
They started out more in smaller cities, but they've since expanded into the big metropolises, and there's even talk of them planning an IPO.
Wow, an IPO. So going public, that's
It's a
serious.
big step, yeah. And what's also significant is you're seeing more collaboration now, like between local governments and private companies, to run these services in a more, let's say, organized way.
Which makes you think about the initial vision, doesn't it? Like, let's take a FIO's founder, Daiwei. Young guy, born 91, former math teacher out in Qinghai, quite remote.
Yeah, there's this sort of almost romantic element to his idea. He apparently believed that the bicycle is the best tool to know the world,
Hmm.
offering this perfect pace, somewhere between walking and driving, to really understand your surroundings.
He positioned Rice not just as a business, but as a movement,
Yep.
right? With this huge ambition to eliminate unknown street corners in this world.
Exactly. For him, the bike wasn't just transport, it was like a tool for exploration.
Hmm.
Even the name OFO, visually, it looks like someone riding a bike. It really spoke to that core idea.
And it started really small, organically, didn't it? Just tackling a real problem students had at Beijing University.
Yeah, you had all this informal bike lending going on and bikes getting lost or abandoned. Chaos, basically.
Right.
So Daiwei's first move was pretty smart. He asked students, donate your unwanted bikes, and you get lifetime free VIP membership in this thing I'm starting.
Huh. Clever.
He got about 2,000 bikes that way, launched successfully right there on campus, won a business competition too, which kind of proved the concept early on.
And then it just took off, expanded beyond the university, membership numbers shot up.
Mm-hmm.
And then that key moment, right, when Zhu Xiaohu from GSR Ventures just shows up, offering money, 15 million yuan, about 2.3 million RMB.
Yeah, and Daiwei was apparently so surprised he thought it might be a scam at first.
You can imagine.
It just shows the buzz, the potential people saw. That investment, that's what really fueled the massive expansion across cities, then countries.
What were the numbers again? By 2018?
By 2018, Daihu claimed something like 10 million bikes, 250 cities, 21 countries, over 200 million users. The scale, the speed of that growth was just phenomenal.
So what was the magic? Why were investors just pouring money into a It surely wasn't just the few yuan per hour they charged for rides.
Oh, definitely not. The business model was actually quite clever, multi-layered. A big part was the deposit system.
Right, the 199 yuan deposit.
Exactly. You paid that to start using the service. Theoretically, you get it back, but if you broke the rules, maybe parked it wrong or something, you could lose that deposit.
Well, okay.
So think about it. Beyond just renting bikes, they were holding onto a huge amount of user capital. That creates opportunity, but also, significant risk down the line.
And I remember reading they worked really hard to get the bike manufacturing costs down, like super low, under 100 yuan.
That's right. So their thinking was, even if a bike got stolen, which cost maybe 100 yuan to make, they kept the 199 yuan deposit. It was almost like they profited from the theft.
Wow.
Plus, they had this enormous pool of deposit money just sitting there. Potentially, they could invest that.
But it wasn't only the deposits, was it? There was the data aspect, too, the mobile data.
Absolutely critical. Every single bike ride generated location data, travel patterns. That kind of information is gold dust. Think about ride-sharing companies like Didi Chuxing.
Yeah, they use data for everything.
Exactly. For business consulting, like where should a new restaurant open based on where affluent people travel, or for public services, optimizing bus routes based on actual travel needs. This kind of big data, its value, can sometimes be even bigger than the main service itself.
Okay, so that explains why a company like Didi would be interested in buying a Vivo. They wanted that bike data to complete their picture of how people move around the city.
Precisely. So if you were an investor back then, it looked like a pretty solid bet, didn't it? Potential for quick returns from deposits, and this really attractive exit plan getting bought out by a bigger fish like Didi.
Okay, so the rise makes sense. Real need, cool vision, seemingly smart business model, lots of investment. So where did it start to go wrong? What tipped it over into the fall?
Well, the first big thing was just the sheer number of competitors jumping in. Avivo's success basically invited imitation. The biggest rival was Mobike, started by Hu Weiwei, a former auto journalist, in Shanghai around the same time.
Mobike, right. Similar timeline.
Very similar. Launched, expanded quickly, just like Avivo. And eventually you had something like 70, maybe even more, bike-sharing companies all fighting for a piece of the pie across China.
70. Wow. And that intense competition, that sounds like the first real problem.
It really was, because the way the business was set up, relying so much on deposits and data, it really worked best if one company dominated. A monopoly, basically.
Oh, right.
But instead of working together, or one winning quickly, they got locked into this incredibly destructive fight, trying to kill each other off.
Which led directly to that flood of bikes we saw everywhere. Those pictures of just mountains of them.
Mm-hmm.
What was the actual scale? Was it as bad as it looked?
Oh, it was massive. Experts figured, a healthy ratio is maybe one shared bike for every 50 people in a city.
Okay.
In Beijing, that meant they needed maybe 434,000 bikes. But if Yuso and Mobike each put over 1 million bikes there, the total hit something like 2.4 million bikes in just one city.
2.4 million. That's insane.
Total chaos, bikes blocking sidewalks, roads. People literally had to pile them up just to walk past. And user behavior declined too, People stopped caring, bikes got damaged, abandoned everywhere.
And fighting for customers like that must have cost a fortune.
Absolutely. Both of Mako and Mobike were bleeding cash. Huge costs for managing the bikes, trying to collect them, redistribute them, repair them. And at the same time, they were spending massively on discounts, free rides, promotions, trying to win market share, just completely unsustainable losses.
So investors started getting nervous, looking for a way out.
Yeah.
And the idea of a merger came up between Moko and Mobike, pushed by Zhu Xiaohu, the early Moko investor.
Hey, that seems logical, right?
Combined forces.
It did on paper. Back in 2017, bike sharing was getting maybe 50 million rides a day. The theory was merge of Mobike, people wouldn't need two apps, usage could double to 100 million rides daily.
Okay.
That alone, just from ride fees, could maybe bring in 30 billion yuan a year, enough to be profitable. Plus, imagine the value of the combined deposits and all that unified user data. Much stronger position.
But it didn't happen. The merger failed. Why? What stopped it?
Well, a couple of big things. First, Daiwei, the Bug founder, he really stuck to his guns about Moko being more than just a business. It was this movement, remember?
I mean, the vision thing.
Yeah. And he saw Mobike as just purely business-focused. He felt merging would basically betray his ideals, the whole point of Lufo.
Interesting. And the second reason?
Didi Chuxing, the ride-sharing giant, they had their own plans.
Didi again?
Exactly. Didi was looking at buying of themselves separately. They wanted to combine their car data with Ovos's bike data. They figured if Ovo and Mobike merged first, the price to buy the combined company would be much higher.
Right.
And it would probably make it harder for Didi to then restructure everything the way they wanted after buying it, more complicated.
And Didi actually got quite far down the road with buying Avodo, didn't they? But then they found something.
They did. Didi was prepping a $3 billion offer, apparently. They even sent some of their own executives over to join Avos's management temporarily,
Okay.
and that's when they discovered it. Avofo had been using the customer deposit money, that 299 yuan per person, to pay for its day-to-day operations, its marketing campaigns.
Whoa, using the deposits.
Yeah. Now, technically, there weren't strict rules against it at that exact moment, but ethically, it was dubious and financially incredibly risky. Those deposits weren't revenue. They were liabilities, money they owed back to users.
So Didi pulled out.
Understandably, yes. They backed away from the Offo deal fast and ended up buying a different, small bike-sharing company called Blue Go instead.
And Alibaba, the other tech giant, they had a similar experience with Afavo.
Pretty much. Alibaba also tried to invest. Daiwei apparently turned them down too. So Alibaba pivoted and put their money into HelloBike instead.
Okay, so the merger's dead, big potential buyers are walking away. Things must have started looking really bad for Afavo. And then the media got wind of the financial problems.
That was the tipping point, January 2018. Reports came out saying Avavo was burning through maybe 500 million yuan a month, but only had about 350 million left in cash.
Wow, less than a month's runway.
Exactly. The numbers suggested they were incredibly close to running out of money if things didn't turn around immediately.
And when that news hit,
Yeah,
I imagine users with deposits panicked.
totally. You saw a massive rush of people trying to get their 199 yuan back. It was essentially a bank run on a Moboro.
Right.
Then they stopped processing refunds online, and you got those images of huge queues forming outside of Mofro's headquarters in Beijing, people desperate to get their money back.
And the total amount they owed in deposits was huge, wasn't it?
Astronomical. Around 3 billion yuan in total deposits.
Yes.
Money they simply didn't have anymore.
So how are those refunds going now? Are people getting their money?
It's been incredibly slow. They're supposedly processing them first come, first served, but people who applied way back then are still waiting. Some online calculators estimate it could take, like, decades at the current pace for newer applicants.
Exactly.
Yeah. And interestingly, Amopo hasn't actually gone bankrupt, not officially, but they've shrunk massively, just a shadow of their former selves.
And Mobike, what happened to them in the end? They got bought, but it wasn't smooth sailing either.
No, not really. Mobike was sold to Meituan, the big food delivery and local services platform, in April 2018 for about 15.6 billion yuan. But Meituan's own financial reports later showed Mobike was still losing a lot of money, even after the acquisition. So eventually, Meituan drastically cut back Mobike's operations too. Now it's just integrated into the main Meituan app, branded as Meituan Bike.
But as we mentioned earlier, that's not the end of the story for bike sharing itself.
Yeah,
It seems like it's finding a new equilibrium, a more sustainable level.
exactly. You have players like HelloBike, who started regionally, now moving into the big cities, and they're working much more closely with local governments, which helps manage things better.
And they dropped the deposit model mostly, right?
Yeah, largely. Which
Yeah.
makes it feel more like just another accessible public transport option, for that final bit of your journey, that last kilometer.
So stepping back, looking at the whole arc, the big takeaway seems to be, yes, it looked like a classic bubble, felt like a bubble, probably was a bubble in terms of investment frenzy.
Right.
But the actual service, the idea of shared bikes, it hasn't vanished. It's adapted, evolved, and found a way to stick around more sustainably.
That's a really crucial point, I think. It kind of pushes back against that easy narrative you sometimes hear about Chinese business, just boom, bust, leave nothing behind.
Yeah.
This shows that even after all that chaos, that excess, if a service is genuinely useful, it can find its place, adapt, and actually provide long-term value.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What other things that looked like failures, these big, hyped-up innovations that seem to crash and burn, might actually be quietly transforming behind the scenes, finding a different, maybe less flashy, but more stable and valuable role.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to look past the dramatic headlines sometimes. The boom and bust gets the attention, but the adaptation, the survival, that might be the more interesting story in the long run.
Definitely something to think about. Looking beyond the bubble to see what actually lasts.